everybody. Welcome to episode 86 of the Daniel 3 podcast. Thanks for tuning in tonight. This was originally going to be last night, and then I rescheduled for tonight. So I'm sorry there was not a lot of warning on when the episode was going to come out. But again, like I've said on the last several episodes, when you hit kid number 4, you suddenly just learn to live without a schedule, because I mean, between kids getting sick and uh, kids hurting themselves and having to last minute scramble to convince the state that uh, it's okay for me to educate my own kids, and that's a whole story I'll need to do a podcast on. Little fight, mini fight, nothing major I had to get into with my school district. But anyway, just lots of stuff going on. But yeah, I'm happy to be here talking with our guest tonight and with all of you who are going to watch in the comments. It's going to be a good show. So sponsors, and do I have a wine? I don't have a wine bottle to hold up here, but as always, we have Rabbit Eye Blueberry Wine. My good friend Will Bell down in Georgia. I always like to plug him. You've seen me talk to him on Reed Coverdale's show, Capitalist Communion. If Jesus was walking the earth today and turning water into wine, it would be Rabbit Eye Blueberry Wine, as the saying goes. So you can check that out at rabbitieye.com. And that's it for introductions and plugs. I'm going to bring our guest up. I think this is his third or fourth time on the show, but we've had many conversations, whether it was this show or whether it was on. I've been a guest host on his show, can't speak tonight. Enemy of My Enemy, on the We Are Libertarians Network. I've been a guest host on that show many a time, and we've had some discussions on a couple other podcasts as well, at least one other podcast, I think. But I've known this guy forever, good friend of mine. And what's funny is, like 2 or 3 months ago, I was defending him to all of my friends, and then I feel like in the last couple of weeks he was having to do the same thing and defend me to a bunch of his friends. So we like taking turns with that. But he is the infamous Hodey Johns. Hodey, how you doing tonight?
Hey, Jacob, how's it going, man? We got each other's backs, except for this conversation in which we will fight.
Well, yeah, we will destroy each other. But
yes.
Yeah, no, dude, it's so funny because I don't know what it is, because I feel like you and I are like, anyone who gets to know us a little bit, anyone who like talks to us, it's like I feel like, not that we can't get animated about something and we're not passionate, but I don't feel like we're incredibly controversial or incredibly hard to get along with. Like, but yet it seems like me to some of the people that you associate with, and vice versa. We tend to rile certain crowds up. So I don't quite understand it, although it does. I mean, I guess I take it somewhat as a compliment that I live rent free in some people's heads, and it's all you can really do sometimes.
I mean, my goal is never to make anybody unhappy with me. I don't want to be disliked. I think that's a terrible goal that some people sometimes feel the challenge. Like, I'm disliked, hooray! It's like, you can be disliked by saying very simple, stupid things.
I hate it. Like, honestly,
right? It's terrible.
I had to learn to draw a boundary, and I wouldn't, I don't embrace being disliked. I've had to learn to achieve a zen, to just realize, like, there's some people who no amount of trying to explain and trying to reach out to is going to get them to change their mind. Some people dig their heels in, they form an opinion of me, and I'm not doing myself any favors if I try to bend over backwards to try to get someone to, change their mind, whether it's an opinion about me or on something I believe, or a character flaw, or whatever. It's just like, there are some people who, like yourself, who we don't agree on everything, and we sometimes get into it, but we always walk away friends. We always walk away with, hey, I respect you as a person, as an individual, and I like that. I don't like having an echo chamber. I like having a diverse crew of people who I can talk to. I feel like it keeps me honest. I feel like it keeps me sharp. You can't grow if you're not, just like you have to go through adversity to grow in anything in life, whether that's trying to learn something, whether it's trying to grow your body and grow stronger, and I think that applies to spiritual matters too. It's kind of like that old saying, if you ask God to, you pray for patience, God will give you like, a 5-hour wait at the DMV to help teach you how to be patient. It's like, be careful what you wish for, but it's like, you don't grow by, being in some kind of like hypo alert, like what's the word I'm looking for, like sterile environment. You know what I mean? Like you have to be willing to be in environments where you're not always going to be 100% comfortable, but you have to, I guess, learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Although that's a bit of an oxymoron.
Be in the world and not of the world, right? I mean, it's just, we kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
accept that sin is part of the business here. Nobody's even trying to be sinless. That's not really the goal. We have a sacrifice for that. The goal is to be here and in the world because, like, yeah, we're all going to make mistakes. We want to, of course, try to be sinless, but it's easy to be sinless if you like lock yourself in a room and never leave and then starve to death. That's a terrible result, right? If your goal is to just like say like, I'm never going to make a mistake, right? So we all make mistakes. We make millions of mistakes. I mean, the most talkative people make lots of mistakes. My value is in people who can admit those mistakes and just be like, yeah, I mean, I talk a lot, therefore I make a lot of mistakes, versus people who don't say anything and make no mistakes. I would much prefer to be in the prior group, but that just means all I got to do is practice apologizing, except when things didn't go right, accept accountability for what I can without selling out my morals or values or principles, and just say like, I can apologize for a lot without selling myself down a river, basically. And it's fine. I mean, I understand why things are a big deal to people. Everything's a big deal to somebody. This is one of my big reasons for being an anarchist and really falling hard into the philosophy when I started into it, was because everything hurts somebody. And we can say, that's not that big a deal. I don't care. If it's one person like starving to death in a room, I don't want that to happen. I don't want hate to happen. I don't want violence to happen. And so for me, it's like, yeah, I get that everything hurts somebody. So I get why a lot of people find like these disagreements and why they seem small, but they're not, because to them it hurts somebody, right? And I get that. We're like all representing a lot of hurt people out there. We all got a lot of heart, we have a heart, and we sometimes think a lot of people don't see it our way. And we need to kind of buck up and just say like, listen, I understand that everything hurts somebody, but if I was not friends with anybody who made a mistake, I would just be friendless, and you're going to have disagreements. And like I'm saying, serious disagreements. I get it. I'm not asking you to say your disagreements aren't serious, but if you allow these disagreements to affect friendships, you're just plain not going to have any friends, just flat out. Or you're going to have a cult and an echo chamber like you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. The infamous cult saga. That was a fun one. But there was, although the point you were trying to make back then certainly was true. I think some of us just felt like that wasn't the right term, but I think, we all have to be, be on guard, you know what I mean? To not fall into groupthink. It's really easy to fall into. It doesn't matter if it's politics, religion, anything, you know what I mean? And I think something you and I, we both have although yours is much more extensive than mine, but we both have a background in speech and debate. And I think anyone who has that, I think, you have to, be intellectually rigorous in trying to, make arguments from positions that you don't hold, which teaches you to have a sort of like mental flexibility in terms of being able to consider multiple points of view and at least consider that you might be wrong. And also to at least like know, to make my arguments as strong as they can be, I need to understand opposing points of view. And you can do that somewhat through research, but sometimes, knowing people who have different points of view gives you a great way to get more of an understanding of things that you don't necessarily agree with. And I'm definitely a lot like you. It's like I say a lot of things, and some of them are great, some of them are misses, and I try to own the misses. And at the end of the day, I would rather be Brett Favre than Alex Smith. You know what I mean? It's like I remember Alex Smith had like this one year where he had like an incredibly low interception rate,
Right.
pretty average quarterback rate, you know what I mean? And like statistically, it's like, oh wow, the efficiency. It's like, yeah, but how many championships does Alex Smith have? You know what I mean? It's like, uh, I would rather be Brett Favre and have, as many, almost as many blunders as amazing plays possible. But you know what? It's like, I'd rather die trying than play it safe sometimes, because I don't want to live in fear of saying the wrong thing to the extent that it would cause me to not try to, you know what I mean? Like, it's better to be trying, I think, than to be holding back, or at least that's how I approach it.
I think it's a fantastic analogy, because there are times when you just say, look at so-and-so's efficiency, so-and-so's touchdown rating. I like Aaron Rodgers. I mean, MVP for the last 2 years, but he gets to the playoffs and it's like, well, he didn't throw any picks. And it's like, he also didn't throw any balls that were over 4 yards away from the line of scrimmage. Like, they were losing and they just kept, like, it was like a slow bleed, just like, oh, there's another completion for 2 yards and another one for 3 and another one for 3. And here comes the punt unit. And you're like, all right, it's time to start doing something. Let's start making some plans. Like you say, like, sling it out. Let's go for the big plays. We got a lot at stake. And I think, is like you said, as long as you have ownership of the mistakes that you make, it's really that's kind of the beauty of this world, is not that it is perfect, but that it is a cycle of perfection, of learning from these things and learning to become like Christ, learning to become better. And we just flat out don't do that without the broken process, of Christ talking about reshattering at us and building us up again, and shattering us and building up again, like with the clay,
Yeah.
re-wet us down. And it's like, sometimes we just need a good wet down. I have had a few of them in the last year where I'm just like, I am not making a difference fighting with who I'm fighting with, or doing what I'm doing, or whatever it is. Like, I might be getting a few more followers that already liked me before, but that's nothing. It's really not, it's inconsequential. I want to be somebody who's making a difference in people's lives. And, I think you just kind of learn, you slowly grow, and all these are things, of course, we wish we learned them when we're 18. And I mean, as anarchists, Jacob, I'm sure we see a lot of things where it seems so obvious to us now. Well, I didn't figure it out until I was like 36. You know what I mean? So, I mean, there's a lot of very intelligent, highly gifted people that are just further behind on the path. And by making fun of them for being further down on the path, you make them look like they're higher on the path, first of all, because they have the high road over you all of a sudden. And then secondly, it doesn't bring them up to where you are. This is a matter of assistance. We really are trying to bring people in, instead of drive people off.
Yeah, 100% agree. So we could spend the next hour just agreeing with each other, but that's not what we advertised here. We advertised a MMA showdown between two Christian anarchists, because surprisingly, you can be that much of a niche and still have lots of disagreements.
Yeah.
But
the ground floor is we'll probably end up being friends afterwards. But now,
yes.
But yeah, now I'm gonna unleash some expletives.
Yeah. So I don't have a particular order I want to go through these on, and I want to keep it, lively and interactive, but this is obviously isn't a formal debate, and I'm much more interested in just having genuine interactions of ideas than I am in trying to win a point or trying to, to dominate. And like, oh, I won because I got all these different points out. Like, that's not the point of this discussion, at least in the way I'm trying to approach it. But I think a foundational issue, which we should probably begin with, because I think, as Christians, this is going to be perhaps the thing where, because we disagree on this one, it's going to cause probably some of the disagreements we have on some of the other issues, is the matter of how we view the Bible. And I guess there's, broadly speaking, there's probably more than one way to look at the Bible, but I think if we were going to narrow it down into like two basic categories as far as like general Christology, it would be that there are some people who view the Bible as like the inerrant, holy inspired word of God, that from beginning to end, there's nothing there that shouldn't be there, and to take anything away from it would be wrong. And more specifically, that there's nothing in the scripture that would contradict other parts of the scripture, that it's one cohesive unit, and anything that might on the surface seem like there's a contradiction, would just require further reading and a proper hermeneutic to an interpretation, going back to either the Hebrew or the Greek or whatever to understand that. That'd be kind of more where I'm coming from. Of course, the devil's in the details, because I do recognize that, like, there are things that God changed in the new covenant versus the old covenant. I wouldn't classify them as like that's a God contradicting himself in terms of he's in conflict with himself. It's just that, like, there's an evolution of ideas and revelation there. So then there's like maybe on the other extreme, and there's probably like varying degrees of positions between these two extremes. So the other extreme would be like, I see a lot in the Christian anarchist camp who say that the Bible is written by man, and thus it's flawed. And especially like the anarchist perspective would be like, there were systems of authority who were in charge of making these assembling these books and interpreting them, and we can't know to what extent the human element in all these different personal subjective writing pen to paper or ink to paper, and then people copying the manuscripts over time, what has been changed, what has been left out. There are legitimate, you can go back and study the history of the scriptures and see where there actually have been attempts by people, for whether it's political or religious reasons, and they actually do sometimes, like, very sneakily edit things and change words to different words, and so that definitely happens, and so you have to give the devil its due there. But I guess there are some people who, because of these facts, would take the opinion that the Bible has probably within it things that are God inspired, but that we have to read the Bible with sort of a critical lens and sift through what elements of it are inspired and from God, and what elements are, the author putting his opinion and his cultural or personal worldview into the text, and rescue the baby from the bathwater. So I don't know exactly where your position is, and I don't want to argue against a straw man. So I don't know if you're on one extreme or another extreme or somewhere in the middle. I will let you A, explain what your position is, and then B, if you want to take aim at uh my position, which is more of a traditional inerrancy of the Bible position, we can take off from there.
Sure. So, I mean, first off, as far as the Bible never having errors, you've already explained there have been iterations, there have been changes. I'm from Utah. We had kind of a famous one out here that created a bit of a controversy, because when parts of Isaiah were translated into the Book of Mormon, there's a plural of seraphims with an S, but seraphim is already plural, right? That's im suffix is already plural. And so it was one of very few KJV oopsie daisies, right? That just got printed, not in every King James version, but on some printing press, right? It's like if I went out and added a comma and then somebody photocopied it and gave it to their kids, and it's like, oh gosh. And that same error made its way into the Book of Mormon, right? Like, and so people are like, well, did you just copy Isaiah then, is what a critic would say. I could get into the defense all day of it, but the idea is that we know of errors that have made their way into the scriptures before. Now, as when it comes to stuff like that, you're like, well, it's just like a spelling error. It's like a grammatical error. It's a comma. It's a mistake. Whatever. And so that is certainly true. But then we look at other things. So probably the easiest way to point this out, and I'll give you a few examples just to really shoot this argument to hell that there's no, contradictions in the Bible, but just look at the Easter story at the end of every gospel. It is substantially different. Who was at the tomb first, in what order it happened, in what order they told the apostles. So that's all different. There are 618 commandments in the Old Testament. Like 13 of them pertain to what to do with thieves, and all of them are different, right? So like the Bible in like literally back-to-back chapters will be like, in one verse, if it's a thief, chop their hands off. And then if it's a thief, help them back on their feet. And if it's a thief, like like find them, whatever they stole, or take it back, and then have them do servitude for 7 years. And so we get multiple verses where it's like, here's just something different. Which one was God inspired? They're all in Leviticus. You know what I mean? Like which one, is the one. Perhaps my favorite example, because it's one of my favorite verses in the entire Bible, or passages in the Bible, is the ox and the mire. Where they try to trick Christ into healing on the Sabbath. And this is going to be a core portion of my point, but even the verse itself has an error in it in the different gospels, because the story exists in 3 gospels. And in one, Christ says, would you not rescue your ox from a pit? And the other, he says, would you not rescue your child from a pit? And the other is like, would you not rescue your sheep from a pit? And then it also gets changed around as we start hopping around languages and everything like that. So with everything I'm saying, you might be like, well, Hodey just doesn't believe in the Bible anymore. I guess he's just giving it up. Well, I actually think exactly the opposite of this, because one of the remarkable things we have with Christianity is a lot of archaeology and a lot of like, and we don't have any originals, right? Like, and I get what the term original means. I get we don't have any of that. But we do have very remarkable manuscripts, and we do have ways of tracing how they got changed. A lot of people will kind of go Da Vinci Code with it and be like, the Catholics changed every book in the Bible all at once. They never had control of the entire Bible. I mean, it went to India, and it went to places that were outside of Roman Catholic control. And so there are scriptures that survived there that weren't subject to when somebody was like, let's do this, let's do this. And so we actually have archaeological comparisons where we can say like, hey, here's exactly where you change it. I read from the Interlinear Bible for this very reason. And the Interlinear Bible changes most of the time, at least annually, because we find something new. We find a new verse, we find a new meaning to certain words. There's a lot of words that were slang. They use slang from the time period, and we just kind of like, I don't know. In one case, like the term raka, even the original KJV interpreters had no idea what it meant, so they just left the word raka in there. Like,
there are some words in the Greek or Hebrew that there's no English word to translate it to. You also have the issues of like some words had multiple meanings depending upon whether they be, like in Greek you have the male and the female, and then with Greek the grammar is just completely backwards of what English grammar is. So it's like, there's so many layers to interpreting old manuscripts that even if you could say we had the original or close to the original manuscripts and those are infallible, it's like, well, we definitely have to at least, I would at least concede that our ability to interpret and our ability to translate is certainly fallible, and that's something that needs to be held up to scrutiny.
Yeah. So that's like, and that's where I'm going with this too, because there's so we actually can do our due diligence, right, and just find out the most accurate thing that we can. Yeah. Now, will I say maybe it's not perfect because there's a certain phrases, like I didn't realize this till I was taking theology, but like terms like 40 days or 40 nights just means a long time. Right? Like it's not actually measuring 40 exact days and 40 exact nights. And people are like, well, that's a dumb saying. It's like, well, we have sayings in English, like give me 2 shakes of a lamb's tail.
Yeah.
Well, what is like that?
Yeah. Well, there's like the ways of counting things, like when people like with the Easter story and the 3 days and 3 nights, and people get confused, like, but wait, wouldn't that mean? It's like, well, no, it's just again, it's like it's just a different way. I'm like, I think of like Obi-Wan Kenobi, like from a certain point of view, you know what I mean? This is like
little devil's advocate-y a little bit, but like, and it matters because like the thing is we want to be able, if we're putting our eternal faith in something, we want to know that it's at least somewhat accurate or somewhat true. So my point, and then I would further complete my point on my view on this subject by like the term bow down and worship me when Satan says it is in the Bible. Now, should you bow down and worship Satan? Well, that's not why the verse is present in the Bible.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. So a lot of people accuse my point of view because I will totally confess to throwing out a lot of Leviticus. I guess I'll probably conclude my point with that. But so I guess give me a minute on that, and then I'll give you a long minute to kind of respond. But like the thing is I don't think we throw out Leviticus. I think the purposes of Leviticus is for us to kind of be like, here's what you get when you try to follow the law. And then here's what you get when you try to have faith, right? Like, so there's a lot of stuff in Leviticus where and people will just say, well, Jesus threw it out. No, it gets thrown out in the Old Testament. Like there's stuff about executing prisoners that they pray about it with God. And God's like, I'm sorry, why are you killing everyone in Jericho again? And they're like, well, because that's like the command. He's like, okay, yeah, obviously if there's like cool allies there, please don't kill them. Get them out, get their families out, like rescue.
Right. There's also there's parts where he says, go and kill all the Canaanites. And then he's like, wait, no, don't kill these Canaanites.
Right.
Just leave them alone. Trade with them. Like
exactly. So the big one here, and this is where the ox and the mire thing comes up, and this will be my last point, is that the Pharisees are aware that it is against Levitical law to do any work on the Sabbath, right? Like to go, technically, you're not even supposed to leave your house. Now, they did adopt a cultural, but it didn't make its way into the Bible. In fact, it's in Leviticus that you're not supposed to leave your house on the Sabbath. They did develop a cultural practice where they said you can take like the number of steps it takes to get to the Sabbath building, whatever the Sabbath building may be, whether it's like the tabernacle, temple, synagogue, whatever it may be. You go there, you go back to your home. That's the number of steps you're allowed in the day, right? And they were pretty good about counting these things, right? And so these people put a leper, or not a leper, but somebody with a gimp hand on the side of a temple, right? And so they know that Jesus has to go slightly out of his way to heal this person, right? He has to mess up his number of steps. And the Pharisees are there. They set this whole thing up because they know it's against the law. It is against Levitical law. And Jesus, is like, hey, if one of you guys like had like an ox stuck in the mire and it was drowning, would you let it drown? Because that's what the law says, or would you save it? And they all are quiet because they'd save it. My theory is not because they're good people and they're admitting the truth. The thing is, pulling an ox out of a pit takes more than one person. My guess is they can't lie about it because the people at the temple would be like, that's not true. I helped him with his ox get an axe out of the mire, right? So the point is they broke it too. And then Jesus heals the person after the Pharisees kind of tacitly admit, yeah, we would heal it, right? We would get the ox out of the mire. We would break the law. We know it's the law. We would break it. So a lot of people are like, well, so what? None of the law matters now? None of it matters? Well, the reason Christ gives for that is because this is the purpose of the law. Good fruit comes from good trees. Bad fruit comes from bad trees. If I let my ox die because I followed this stupid law, then the result is a dead, scared ox. And so therefore the tree is bad. Now that may sound like the whole law, like everything is bad. No, look, adultery is still bad. Okay. Like I'm not over here. Like, I'm not going to be like, just do what you want to do, guys. Like I get that accusation a lot when it's like this. Cause it's like the way you interpret the Bible, it's like whatever goes, man. No, the truth is the completion of the law is the completion of goodness, right? We can tell by the fruits of it, so if we do the right thing, we will bear good fruit from it. If we do the wrong thing, we will bear bad fruit from it. So you actually have a very practical way of measuring these things. It's a great practical way, I think, of testing, to bring this conversation full circle, biblical inerrancy. If you say the Bible is correct, okay, well, test it out, right? Try it out. If you think that mixing fabrics, which was never overturned within the scriptures, is still very wrong, a wrong, bad thing to do, and you try to cut out all mixed fabric clothes in your lives and you experience goodness, then I guess it's still the right thing to do, right? Why did kosher law get tossed out? Because it prevented Peter from witnessing to people. Witnessing to the people mattered. The kosher law didn't matter, right? Like the first time the people ask God about kosher law, God's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. This is God. If you're like, worried, like, well, maybe they didn't know how to cook pork. God can teach you how to cook pork. God killed two creatures and clothed them on Adam and Eve. He's very familiar with butchery and like cooking meat and making clothes, right? Like he gets the process. So this whole thing is like, what was the point of it? And I'm not saying that there never was a point. My rationale behind why there was so many different punishments for thievery is because you'll get a thief who came in and was just like, screw it, I want to take more. I don't care if it's your stuff. It should belong to me. I have a lot of stuff already, but I want your stuff. Well, yeah, cut that guy's hands off. I hate that guy. That guy sucks, right? So then you get a verse that says that guy sucks. One chapter later, you get a guy who's starving to death who stole some stuff, and it's like, yeah, it wasn't his, but man, I feel for him. He was hungry. He was scared. He doesn't have a malicious heart. I think he deserves a second chance. And so you get the Levites being like, well, we're approaching God, and all of a sudden we're kind of getting a different result here. Well, the reason being, and this is kind of the point of having the Holy Spirit and conscience, is that we kind of figure these things out, right? By what the fruits of it are. We actually have a very practical way of testing it out. There you go. That's my thing on biblical inerrancy. Kind of, but mostly not really, I guess.
I think so. So there's a lot there where I agree with you in terms of like the practicality and in application. And so some of this comes down to semantics, right? And so I suppose the way I view biblical inerrancy is not like literally line by line. You can just like read the line and take that as take it out of context, and this is 100% true, and follow it, and don't like you have to read the Bible like any other long, comprehensive, complicated narrative, and read it from beginning to end so that you can understand. Like you have to understand the end, especially Jesus, you know, impacts the beginning, impacts how we read and understand the beginning. I mean, imagine reading. I'm not saying that at the time before Jesus, people couldn't read the Abraham and Isaac story and get nothing out of it. But imagine like the degree to which they were lacking the full context of that passage without knowing what was going to, what's going to happen with Jesus on Calvary. Like when you know the gospel story, then you go back and read the story of Abraham and Isaac. You're like, oh wow, like there's a whole new way of reading this now. So when I'm talking about, and sometimes I wonder if maybe inerrancy is not a great word. It's just, again, I struggle for a better word. But what I'm talking about is more of the idea that all of the Bible is from God. And I don't think God, in his mission to communicate what he wanted to communicate to us, has given us teachings that contradict, in the sense of that, like, trying to figure out how to phrase this. There are definitely things that have changed, right? And so I'm not trying to ignore that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that
the phrase you're looking for is, Hodey, you're right. I'm just kidding.
Let me put it this way. So I think God used a lot of the Old Testament law and put that out there, and he put it out there, and I think he meant it, but he meant it in a way of like, you're unwilling and you're not ready yet to have that veil torn. Like you're not willing to come up onto the mountain with me. We rescued the Hebrews from Egypt, but the Egypt was still inside of them, and their hearts were still hard and rebellious. I mean, Moses goes up on a mountain for a couple of days and there's a golden calf. You know what I mean? It's like, which always blew my mind. Right? It's like, imagine you saw all the plagues, you saw the pillar of fire, you saw the Red Sea split, Pharaoh's army get consumed by it, and then it's like Moses is gone for a few days. They're like, yeah, screw this God guy. He doesn't care about us. Let's erect a golden calf. It's like, what? it's like, where does but it's just, this is the people that Moses and God were dealing with. And I think, to put it this way, it's kind of like the expression, like, you give milk before bread and bread before meat. And I think to some extent, God, in the sort of analysis of God the Father and that we are his children, well, humanity is this child that God's trying to raise. And there are times in that developmental history, which is described to us in the Bible, where God is like, okay, you need to learn the lesson about legalism. So we're going to try legalism. See how well that works. It doesn't. Just
have
like
yourself a king, guys.
Yeah. That's the other thing. Because that 1 Samuel 8. Because after the book of Judges, people are like, we're tired of personal responsibility and governing ourselves. Give us a king who will fight all of our battles and just solve everything for us so we can sit back and just, not have to worry about anything and do anything ourselves. And God's like, yeah, it's going to be a real bad time. I'm going to warn you. You still want it? Okay. Then we have, however many years of, hundreds of years of kings and stuff, and Israel's taken over and over again. And then eventually they're completely exiled. And it's like, so that doesn't mean that, like God definitely said, yes, we're going to have a king. It's going to be Solomon. And then, yes, we're going to have a second king. It's going to be David. And like those things came from God. Does that mean we establish that what God decrees as morally normative is monarchy? Well, no. It's just that I think people want to read the Bible as if it's some kind of like line by line, here are all the good things, here are all the bad things, go live a good life. And that is not the Bible. The Bible is a narrative, and you have to read it like that. This is where I think, although Jordan Peterson isn't your stereotypical, evangelical Christian, I think the way that he pushes a more, reading the Bible as a narrative and understanding a lot of the psychological elements at play here is an important perspective that a lot of Christians don't bring. They don't bring that nuance to it. They go back and read the conquest of Canaan, and they read the Levitical law as if it is the line by line. This is what God decrees as morally good and morally bad. Of course, ignoring the 99% of the things in Leviticus that they break all the time to focus in on the couple that they really want to focus on because of reasons. But I don't think that's the right way to do it, but I don't think that because that's the wrong way to do it, that means, which is kind of what you said. You kind of said this yourself. You're like, well, I don't throw Leviticus out. It's an important part of, the Bible, and reading it and understanding that didn't work. I pretty much agree with that. It's just when I agree with it, I frame that in the lens of we need to read Leviticus, and we need to treat Leviticus as God's word. But what I mean by God's word here isn't God is saying, everything in Leviticus was, the best that, the law described in Leviticus, every single line is the best that human governance could ever achieve. And it's definitely God's, end goal. You know what I mean? Like, no, this was kind of like God is basically taking a people who were going to do a lot of these things anyway. And so there's two angles. In some ways, there were things in the Levitical law that were restraining the evil of the people, like, saying, hey, you know what? Some people, like the edgy atheists, will throw out, hey, the Old Testament says that you can stone your kids. It's like, yeah, there is stuff in there about stoning your kids. But you know what? Before the Levitical law, if parents wanted to stone their kids, they just go stone their kids, and everyone would just be like, okay, like, you stoned your kids. They were your kids. You had the right to do that. What the Levitical law, what the Old Testament law brought to the table was, hey, you actually don't just get to go stone your kid. You have to go before the entire community and accuse them of, of this crime that, and, like, it creates
Still
a
don't stone your
process.
kids, guys. Please,
What?
still don't. Still
Oh
don't.
yeah, please
Stone your
don't. Yeah,
kids,
no.
please.
But the point is, and so there's also the laws about slavery, which are very similar. Which is like God could have just said, "Don't keep slaves," and they would have still kept slaves. So God was.
Here's the kicker: when you ask God, He tells you not to. Like, that's the thing, is the Levitical interpretation of whatever God was thinking. Every time they approach God about it, God's like, what? Like, that is a dumb rule, and like there's certain rules that make sense because they are based on something, and then there's certain rules where you're just like, eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Yeah, well, eye for an eye is in the book. Like,
but that was almost like, eye for an eye was. So that's another angle where, like, people used to want to go above and beyond what could be. So it's like, you stole $1 from me, I'm gonna burn your house down. So I think, so eye for an eye. Now listen, is that like the highest pinnacle of God's moral decree and what human interaction can be? No. But was it a step in the right direction compared to what preceded it? Yes.
So here, I guess, would be then my question to you then, because I think we may be approaching a similar kind of plane here. At what point then do you say that these old verses that people point to as an excuse for their actions, even though their actions are yielding bad things, Do you say, well, I'm not going to do that. I don't care if it may be written in the Bible, but I'm going to do what yields good fruit, right?
Well, I think what I would say is, and I would need specifics to know for sure, but my experience is that when people point to something in the Bible, usually Old Testament, sometimes New, and they go, this is, whatever, barbaric nonsense. This is, against the character of Christ. This is whatever. They say, you don't do this. This is in the Bible, and explain that apparent contradiction. My experience is usually that when I dig deep into that, I find there's a few different things happening. Sometimes it's, and I won't say all the time, and I wouldn't expect this from you, but sometimes it's just people like get things wrong. They take things out of context, and you read the context and go a little bit different.
Right.
Sometimes it's okay. Like I said before, this is bad, but this was God sovereignly working humankind and starting with Israel and trying to push them in the right direction in terms of moral growth. And so comparing that to what came before it, it was a step in the right direction. Is this what God declared as morally normative for all time? Well, no. And I think we can look later in the Bible, like you said, and see times where God actually starts to push them even further to go. And, especially the Sermon on the Mount is like the pinnacle of this, where, you know, Jesus is the best reflection of God that we have, of the character of God, of the heart of God. And Jesus, like, guys, like, the law was not there to tell you how to be righteous. It was just there to try to keep you from being complete barbarians. Like, you gotta step it up. You can't just be looking to how evil can I be all the time. You got to start trying to be as good as you can be and as righteous as you can be. But that doesn't mean that the law that were there didn't have a good godly intention, and that either those things were just not from God, or that like God got it wrong and contradicted himself later. It's like, no, it's just like, like, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's times when you're parenting your child where like you tell them a way of doing things when they're 4 years old, and then when they're 16 years old, you're probably not still talking to them and instructing them or advising them in the way you did when they were 4. Like, you have to meet your child where they're at in their developmental path and push them to the next part in that developmental path. So that doesn't, what I would object to is if people go back to, Stone Age morality that God was using to take people from that time and develop them down the road, I would go, listen, back then, I think God got it right in terms of what was needed to progress the narrative towards salvation, towards Christ, towards the redemption of mankind. Is that what we need now? Well, no. Like, we're so far removed from that. That served its place. We're supposed to learn from that lesson, but we're not supposed to, travel back in time and apply the standards that God gave Old Testament Israel at those points in history and apply it to us today. That to me is a wrong use of scripture.
But I don't think it just changes for just general humanity. Although I would agree with you that peoples and societies are certainly, if you're going to make general rules, and this is the issue with law in general, right? If you make rules, they have to blanket everything and it will get it wrong. A lot of people, when they read the Old Testament for the first time, are really shocked to find that God did not want to give out the 10 Commandments. He did not want to lead by a pillar of fire and smoke. Like, he is very resentful from having to give manna. He's like, I really want to craft you guys into people that do these things for your own.
He wanted them to come up on the mountain with Moses, and they said, no, you go, Moses. We're going to stay back here.
Right. We're going to hang here. So the thing is like, there is some stuff that's just like that. People, like society in general, changes, right? I'm not ignorant to the generalizations of the times that we're in. That being said, I think if you kill somebody for committing adultery and that's wrong, that remains wrong, right? Like, I think if you kill, there are certain things that you do if you, kill and let's see, have sex with an animal, right? That remains wrong, regardless of if it says this is right, this is wrong, or this is okay, this is not okay. So even if the Bible at some point says, and Levitical law somehow says, yeah, you should really execute all the prisoners, including their little babies, including let's throw capitalism here real quick, including burning all their food and make their land unusable. And it's
Which,
like,
by the way, they never, and it's important to note out, they never actually followed through 100% on
they
those.
didn't, and it caused
Yeah.
Samuel to get so PO'd that he never talked to Saul again because of it. And he was like, I'm
Yeah.
going to get David because I think this guy actually will kill all the other guys. And it's
Yeah.
like, I think Samuel, even himself, he says he speaks for God. I have no doubt that Samuel is even a prophet. We get a lot of biblical scriptures from him. But then again, Jonah was a prophet, and he was a very flawed individual wanting to evade the will of God at some point, So like these are all things that we have to do. Now, I do think that I still quote the scriptures all the time, and I want people thinking I get away from it, because I think there's a lot of rationale behind these things, and things that are important to understand. And I think things that I think using Christ's proof of saying, if the fruit is good, then the tree is good, right? If the fruit is bad, then the tree is bad. To plant these seeds and just be like, we can kind of tell, if this is good or bad. If I just go out and start killing adulterous women, how will that do for me? Right?
I think
will that be good fruits or bad
here's
fruits?
the thing. I think the fruit of the Levitical law was good insofar as the fruit is God used the Old Testament, like all of it, the laws in Exodus, Leviticus, all of it, God used to demonstrate that the law can't save you. So that is a good fruit. The law pointed to our need for a savior, because not only could the law not save us, but the law wasn't even, as Jesus showed later, this isn't even close to you living righteously.
Right.
God just asked you, please be a little bit less evil. You guys couldn't even hit that mark. And so I'm not saying that go and kill all the people, including the women and the children, that is morally good. But that's what people a lot of times did back in those days when they were doing, when they were conquering and they were warring. And, again, some of this is God sovereignly, putting laws in place that are kind of meeting the people where they're at, where there's listen, if God would have given a more 21st century flavored structure of laws and morality for them to follow, I mean, heck, they couldn't even follow the Stone Age level of
Right.
So it's to me, it's to what extent are we saying that this is God's word? Are we saying it is God's word that you should go to war against other nations, and that when you go to war with them, that it's sometimes good, or that that you should think it's good to go and kill all of them, including the women and children? It's no, I not only do I think if you go to war with somebody, it's bad to kill all of the civilians, including the women and children. I'm anti-war. I don't think you should go to war, period.
Right.
But I think we get there eventually with Christ. It's just that God has to he has to tell the story. If he starts with the conclusion before he even gets, you got to tell the beginning, the middle, and the end. And God has to set these things up. And you can't give, it's kind of like if you watched, imagine someone had never watched Star Wars before, and then you just show them the end scene with Darth Vader throwing Emperor Palpatine down the shaft in the Death Star. People would just be like, okay, this guy killed that guy who was hurting that guy. No context. No, it doesn't mean anything. You have to watch New Hope and Empire to actually receive the payoff of the conclusion of Return of the Jedi. And you need all of the Old Testament to really understand and receive the impact of what was concluded on Calvary, I think. And so insofar as I think that's true, I take the entire Bible as the inerrant word of God. I just think where I think we're getting, where we're not meshing up is that it's a bit on, okay, on the whole narrative front, we probably agree, but then you want to go, okay, but line by line, what do you do with these really awful, statements and laws of which the fruit would be bad? And I think your intuition is to say, well, they're just not God's word. And my intuition is to say they're God's word, and we just have to understand the context that they were given and how they were given in the context of that developmental history, and they don't apply to us today. They only applied, insofar as they did apply, they applied for a limited time back then to those people. And I don't think that you can even say that God, when he prescribed those, that you can say that God was saying these things are good. It was more like God was like, I mean, like, think about, and this might be a good place, because we could go on this for like 2 more hours probably, but this might be a good place to transition to the parenting conversation, because there's a lot of parallels here, because it's
Yeah.
like, even, because I think, we both believe in peaceful parenting. I think we, are a little bit different around the edges, but like even the most radical people I've talked to in the peaceful parenting realm, like I had a conversation with Rachel Blackfire last year, and like we all agreed, like, listen, when you have a baby, right? Like there are some things that you kind of have to do, because it's like, I know that if my child was like 20 and looking back, they'd be like, yeah, I wanted you to change my diaper, not just let me sit in a in a diaper filled with pee and poop all day, but like you could imagine someone, if they were being like just going really hardcore, being like, listen, you can't do anything without your child's consent, and the baby's crying, they're not consenting to having the diaper changed. You know what I mean? It's like there's some points where you have to do some things that are acceptable while your child is in that infantile state, that they're only acceptable when they're in that infantile state. I can't then go to like my 16-year-old son and be like, hey, you're not taking care of yourself. And because you're not taking care of yourself, I'm now going to force you to do things to take care of yourself. It's wrong to do that to a 16-year-old, but it's kind of like it would be wrong not to do that to a baby. So in the same way that I think that thing's true for our own kids, I think that's how God dealt with us, like mankind throughout history. There's things he did when we were in our infantile state that like that's what he had to do to move the development along. But they were limited to that time. They're not things that apply to us, or if they do, they apply on a scale. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. I guess react to that, and then
Yeah.
we can move on to the next topic.
I got you. I mean, to cap off the last conversation, I know you're saying it's my intuition that it kind of gets tossed out a little. It's actually God's intuition. They approach him about, hey, do we kill this prisoner? And he's like, no. Where'd you get that from? And it's like, oh, well, I just thought you literally just said it like a minute ago. Right. And it's like, well, okay, what do I do with this thief? Oh, it's different today. Like I woke up and it's different. Well, like, and I get your point, because I think generally we do agree there is like a narrative structure here. Like, I think that especially the one reason he's okay with actually delivering the 10 Commandments is because it is a pretty solid minimum. There's a lot of do nots, right? Kind of like negative, which is a great libertarian thing, right? Like
Yeah.
I can't command you to do all good, because good is a million different things, like for everybody. I can just try to get you to not step on a landmine, right? Like, how do I get from here to here? Well, everybody's at a different point on the base of the mountain, but I can tell you there's landmines here, here, and here. Now, not all of them are negative, obviously. Love God, those are positives and everything like that, but those are going to look different. I think even the positive ones, like honor your father and mother, well, honoring your parents can look very different to different people, and those are intentionally vague. We are told the Lord rejoices in simplicity, and I think it's good because we have these vague things to kind of say, I don't know what all good is, because I can't. If we wrote the Bible so that it encompassed every person's life, we would never be able to finish it. At some point it comes down to the Holy Spirit inside of us, and what we're able to do with that. To carry this over to the parenting conversation, I think it's fantastic, because once again, I think the same rule applies. Your fruits will kind of show you if the tree is all right, and this is kind of a situation, Thoreau never had kids. And one of the reasons that I find fascinating about Thoreau is he was such a non-violent, like peace-loving advocate that he had a hard time even considering, like, well, is cutting the umbilical cord violence?
Right.
Like, where does the kid end, the thing begins? Well, I think there's kind of a beauty to like kind of not knowing where the parent ends and where the child begins at the beginning, right? Like, And of course it creates a serious issue when we debate topics like abortion and whatnot. But as far as like philosophically, it's actually a very beautiful thing to say that like no life just comes in on its own and is beamed in from outer space. It's all connected to the lives before it. And so I do think that there's a beauty there. And I think that we need to respect that by being able to say, listen, I don't know the right or wrong thing about how to raise every kid. The Bible's a little bit light on it outside of like not being a total jerk to them. And I think the reason being is because different kids are different. There are different parenting strategy books. Great. I'm going to relate this to weight loss a little. What's the best weight loss plan? The one that works for you. There's a lot that are successful if you can adhere yourself to them.
How many kids do you have? I can't remember if you.
I have 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because kids, people that have one kid, I feel like can't appreciate this, but like once you have at least 2 or more, like I think some people go into parenting, and I was kind of this way, where you go like, well, I'm going to parent my kids in a certain way, and like it's just going to be like, not. I wouldn't say I went in with the naive sense that it was going to be easy, but I kind of went in with the naive sense that like all the challenges would be pretty much the same, and then it's like, okay, no. Completely scratch that. Every child is so different that like what works for one will be completely detrimental to the next one. And not only that, your child is different like day to day.
One kid's doing like reading a picture book at 2 years old. The next one's pooping in their pants till they're 10. Like, everybody's like above. I think it's funny when they try to like measure kids and see where they're above and behind. And like every kid ever is like 5 years above themselves at something and 5 years behind themselves,
right?
Like where they should be at something. Like it is all over the map. And I think I'm glad you bring
this up. It reminds me of
D&D
character building.
Right. A little bit where you rolled your stats, unfortunately, back before the point buy days. This is kind of the issue, is that we attempt to say, well, let's use this same parenting policy. Now, I do believe in peaceful parenting in all cases, right? It's like, in what situation is it okay to rape your kid? Well, none, right? Like it's never okay to do violence, right? Like, so I understand like some things are going to differ kid to kid. That one's going to be, let's go ahead and put that that's always going to be what it is, right? But you're going to have to adapt different tactics. A kid, one style that works for one kid is not going to be the same style that works for the next child. And so I think this is critically important when we talk about in the scriptures, when we analyze and say, well, what is right and wrong? The wrong thing is the thing that provides the wrong fruit. Now, look, there's a lot of trial and error in this. You don't know everything, right? You're going to try a couple things and then be like, shoot, that didn't work. If I imagine that somebody hearing this right now is probably in the process of like spanking their kids, right? And they're just like, not like as we speak, but like that is how they've chosen to raise their child.
That'd be pretty sadistic.
Right. You're listening to this. They're tortured enough. Don't make them listen to podcasts, please. But like,
no, just spank me. Don't make me watch.
Right. And so like the issue there is, it's like, listen, you can go and sin no more, right? I love that line from Christ with the adulterous women, to be like, listen, you only know what you knew, right? You only know what you knew. We've all paid at some point for funding a bomb that blew up a brown kid overseas, an innocent child. We've all done it. Every single person has done it here. Even before we could pay taxes ourselves, somebody did it in our name, right? It's done. It happened, right? All we can do is say, now I know. What can I do to jump off of the shoulders that have carried me this direction, right? So like, I think there's a lot of condemnation, especially for this subject. And people say, well, this happened to me and it worked out okay for me. If you use that line.
It was a survivor's bias.
Right. Survivor's bias, or just, and in some cases to be like, I think it's a knowledge thing. My kid doesn't speak English, and when you hear peaceful parenting for the first time, of course, I understand all the objections because I had them once myself. I was peaceful parent with my kid. I thankfully found it before entering into their lives. But, that there is an issue here where we kind of say like, well, how do I communicate with a kid that just screams and pees and poops and doesn't know the ABCs? Like, you want me to just sit there and rationalize with it? There's some people that do a really, I'll be frank.
Such a false dichotomy when people when it's like, oh, you're not going to spank your kid. What are you going to do? Sit there and talk it out with them? And it's like, with a 2-year-old, it's like, well, no, but like, gosh,
right? Open borders. You're going to let them into your bedroom,
right? It's like, can we just think for more than 5 seconds about like, maybe there's more than two options to this, right?
Right.
Like maybe I'm not forced into a situation where it's either I hit my child to get them to listen to me, or I have to pretend that they're like some 18, 20-year-old who with a high school degree who I can sit there and have a rational discussion with. Like, no, there are like, you could probably in a minute, if you really thought about it, at least come up with 10 or 20 different ideas, alternatives. And like some of them might be bad, but the point is like, maybe they're a little bit less bad than spanking, which by the way, I think that's part of the problem here is people, it's kind of like the nirvana fallacy where people like they want the perfect answer. And it's like, well, you know what? Like sometimes there isn't a perfect answer. You just find the least bad path forward that doesn't involve using force on your child, right?
Yep.
Or if they're even, I think they're, this might be an area where I don't know your exact views are. Like, I mean, I'm sure you would probably, okay, like if your child's like walking out in the traffic, people go like, what are you going to do? Just sit there and like, no, like obviously rescue your child. Like
Yes, that I'm a peace lover. I let them kill themselves.
right, exactly. So, there are appropriate times for like, some measure of force or whatever. But like, I think the point is, I agree with you. Like, what are the fruits of the outcome? If your actions are preserving your child's well-being, generally you're probably doing something right. Um, and you know, compared to what is a question you kind of have to ask. It's like and I don't fault, but sometimes it's like, peaceful parenting is tough, and there are
Yeah.
times in the past, because I've been doing that from day one, but every day is a struggle. I won't pretend that it was always perfect. Like there are times where you have kids hitting each other, and you're like, I want to stop them from hitting each other, and you're like trying to, you're not exactly sitting there with like it's not like a video game where you can pause and go, what's the best strategy to break up this fight? It's kind of like
Dude.
you get in there and you just kind of like you act to the best of your ability, and then like you think on it, you go, ugh, that wasn't the right way to handle it. But you try to improve, right? And I think that's at the heart of peaceful parenting is just like it's like always asking the question of, is there a way I can solve this without any kind of force? And even if you get to like the bottom of the barrel and you go, man, I don't know a way out of this situation without using some measure of force. It's like, okay, then what is the most reserved and responsible use of force you can do? And I think again, like with young kids, that comes into play more than with older kids. But the point being, like, you need to me, peaceful parenting isn't about like some scale of perfection. It's about your heart and pausing to ask the question and always trying to find the most peaceful, which to me it's like I don't peaceful parenting is natural to me because it's like it, that's just how you should live life. Like, obviously your relationship to your kids is like the most important relationship you have other than like maybe your spouse, or you could argue they're equal, or maybe the child relationship is even more important because you have more of a responsibility to them. But it's like, man, shouldn't that just be our mentality with people in general? It's like, how about I just like always try to find any problem that I have with any human being, let me exhaust every possible peaceful uh response to a conflict
Right.
that I can before I consider any use of force. That to me is like the most important nugget I want people to consider.
Yeah, the doing your best is all that I can ask and all anybody can ask. I mean, it's really the key to everything. Because I think when there's some people, you'll be like, well, be peaceful parenting. And to me, it's like, that's something I want to do. I'm excited for that. You get some people like, you who's gonna make me? I control this, I control my kid. Do I not control my kid? Do I not control this situation? And you're just like, you obviously like, I need to back up off of peaceful parenting because you don't have a peaceful soul, right? Like there's a problem.
Yeah.
Like if it doesn't emanate from within, it's like executing. I mean, to go back to another football like analogy, it's like having a run first offense and then going to the no huddle, but all are like running plays. It's like, well, you're not in the right phase right now. Like you need to practice a lot of stuff. You need to work on some things right now. I understand like some resistance to it because everybody's just in we're in a different place. You know, frankly, I was spanked as a kid and I turned out fine. I don't have trauma related to it. That being said, was there a better way to do it? I'm not trying to say that every kid who was ever spanked lived a messed up life.
And not all
Like,
spanking is the same. Like, sometimes I hear how like some will go, well, here's how I spank. And I go, okay, that's not as bad as I was spanked or other people were spanked. But then I go, but if it's so minimal, then why even do it? You know what I mean? Like, you might be able to find a punishment that just that the kid hates worse than that. Like, cause sometimes it's like, oh, I hit them one time and it's super light, and it's like, and I, you know, talk to them the whole time, and I'm like, okay, but like at that point, just don't do it. Like, if you reduced it to the point where it's like basically nothing, you could probably find a better path anyway.
right.
So it's always like, I try very hard not to condemn parents who spank, although honestly, when people talk about like they're my kids, and out, like, like
Right.
that kind of mentality can really bug me. And I know that's like, we had a conversation on a Facebook post or
This is where it
something
goes
like a couple
authority,
weeks
right?
ago.
The
Yeah,
authority
because it's
goes.
like
Yeah.
so I definitely want to delineate that, like, I don't view my kids as mine in the sense that like I own them. Both in, like, I reject the Rothbardian idea of like the children are uh
Property.
yours to do with whatever you want,
Yeah.
including like just letting them die, like,
Right.
like just not feeding them or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
I think that's kind of messed up. And
Kinda.
yeah, a lot messed up. I also
Murray. It's really messed up, Murray.
I also think that the Christians who would interpret the Bible in the way that, like, your kids or yours are, like, well, no, like, if the kids belong to anyone other than themselves, they belong to God, and I've been entrusted to be stewards over them. And so I have to take that with like a high degree of responsibility and humility. And so
Yeah.
those kids are, like, the only sense in which they're mine is that, like, they come from my DNA, and like they're, in compared to, like, the neighbor's kid is not my kid. Like, the kid didn't come from me. It's not the kid that's been entrusted to me. But the kid isn't mine in the sense of like I own them or anything. And the I guess maybe some of the like, the topics where I guess like the rubber meets the road, and I don't know if we agree or disagree on some of this stuff, is in terms of like the role, like, because you and I would agree, like, on not spanking, on I think we would have similar styles of parenting where it's like, even like I try to the best of my ability avoid using like uh punishments. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Because and if there is going to be a punishment or a consequence, I try, if there's a natural consequence, I always default to that, right? It's like, I'm not going to eat my dinner. You're going to go to bed hungry. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's a great natural consequence.
Enjoy death. You want to
Well,
run in traffic?
oh no, no.
Enjoy
There's
get.
obviously a limit there. You know what I
Yeah, I
mean?
know.
But
I know.
it's like, and I wouldn't like let my kids just not eat for days on end. But here's the thing: kids will eventually eat. Is what I've learned. It's like they might
Right.
skip a meal, then wake up in the morning like, I'm so hungry. It's like, okay, well, breakfast will be ready as soon as it can be, and you might take 10 minutes longer than you might normally to,
Yeah.
just to, like, hey, wouldn't it have been better if you had dinner last night? Yeah, it would have been. You just like let the natural consequences of some of those things be their own lessons. You don't even have to really do anything other than just show your kids through experience why certain courses of action aren't good for them and that they don't like them.
Right.
And if I step in at all, it's always like, try to make a consequence fit the action, and try to make it a choice. Like, I always try to, like, give your kids as many choices as you can rather than just forcing them to do things. Like, if I need them to go to bed early for some reason, instead of just telling them, hey, we're going to bed at 7:30, it's not a conversation. It's like, hey, let's talk about bedtime tonight. I know you guys usually go to bed at 8. Daddy wants to do a podcast tonight, and it'd be really, if we can go to bed at 7:30, it'd be a lot easier. Now, what can I do to make that more fun? Like, can we do, like, can we go upstairs at 7 o'clock, brush teeth, and then, like, everyone can pick out a book, and we can have a nice,
Yeah.
more extended time sitting down reading books together. And like, you kids are, I mean, obviously you can't do that with like a 1-year-old, but like, as kids age, they become really willing to have those kind of dialogues and be part of their experience and have some measure of control rather than just like being dragged along through everything. So I would imagine you and I are pretty much on the same page on, most of that.
Yeah, tone, but and I guess here's where kind of the difference comes up, and it wouldn't be a difference between you and me, but it would be a difference between like me and somebody else who's kind of expressing authority over their kids, is that the tone very much matters in all of this. The tone of you, I own you, is very much present with some people in the way that they enjoy parenting. Because they'll
I
say,
agree.
well,
Yeah.
government doesn't get to tell me what to do with my kid. Good. That's great. My government doesn't get to tell me to do either, right? I'm homeschooling them. I'm making the sacrifices that I got to make that happen. Okay, good, right? Like I have no problem with that crowd. But what happens is that tone can then all of a sudden get into, because they're mine, they get to know what I want them to know. They will learn what I want them to learn. I will shield them from information that I dislike. I will not permit them to have these things. I don't permit them to own property. I don't permit them to, if they're sleeping under my house, it's my rules. There's no negotiating. I am the ultimate authoritarian power in this household, and they will learn an authoritarian mindset because they are under my rule, versus what you called stewardship, which is a fantastic word, because stewardship is so much different than authority, even though there is some overlap in that Venn diagram, right? Either one of us might pull our kid out of the road, right? But when all of a sudden one of us is having a kid that's like, hey, dad, I'm just really confused about these feelings, and somebody's like, you shut the F up, no child of mine's going to have those feelings, versus, can you please talk to me about this? Like, I want to have this conversation with you. Let me give you all the information you can about it. I really care about you. I want to see you grow up healthy, and so on and so forth, right? And there is very much a different tone, even though I might say philosophically I'm on the same page with some of these people. There is a different tone there that absolutely does impact the parenting, right? Like our kids
Sure.
won't have similar turnouts. One will be like, well, my dad shielded me from schools. I read a book called Uneducated the other day. My dad might also choose not to teach me that the Holocaust was real. Or, I mean, in the case of this kid, chose not to teach about it at all, right? And this kid ended up escaping and getting out to college beyond all reason, and pronounced the word wrong in like a college course, right? Like she's like, I don't know what this word is, and like she got held at after class, and she was
Oh my
like,
gosh.
I
Oh
don't
my
know what's going
gosh.
on, right? Like, and so the thing is this parent absolutely was like, and correctly asserted that they had a certain degree of stewardship over their kids. The thing is, they crossed the line into authority. And that's kind of where I draw the line, of being like, you are a steward over a person who is their own authority. You are not a
Well, you can
divine
definitely get
authority.
it wrong, right? It's like I would agree, like, yeah, you had stewardship over your child and you had the top claim to instructing and raising your child compared to every other adult in the world. But just because you had that claim doesn't mean you got it all right. Doesn't mean that like we can't criticize and say, "Hey, you didn't teach your kid about the Holocaust. Maybe, that was a big mistake."
Right.
So, to put it very mildly. And honestly, like to not, I don't know, like, was it an absent-minded mistake or if it was it like intentional? Like, if it was intentional, like, even I can't imagine just absent. Like, how would you teach history and just accidentally not bring up the Holocaust? Like, it's hard to even. I'm someone who tries to like almost maybe too. I'm probably more charitable in a lot of people's eyes than is reasonable to try not to assume that people have racist or anti-Semitic intentions to
Sure.
their actions. But man, to like just teach history to someone who then goes off to college and hasn't learned about the Holocaust, like, man, like always assume like stupidity and over malice if it's possible. But man, it's hard to come up with a rational explanation for someone being that absent-minded or dumb.
Yeah, in this particular case, I mean, there's a lot of instances her parents were very much like, they had some good stuff, like, and like, here's the concern about it, which is the reason I read the book, is they have a lot of libertarian overlap. Like they made a big deal about like Ruby Ridge and Waco, and yeah, those are big deals. You should know about them,
Did they not
right?
teach
Like,
World War II?
right. But well,
Like
they
I
taught
was
it,
just
and the issue is like she like it was a blend of I didn't teach you about how bad the Nazis were because I kind of like them, and then like
ugh.
because like the like Holocaust was like kind of a thing that we would support if it happened. We're going to pretend it didn't happen because if we need to talk about it, we would only talk about it positively. So we're not going to talk about it all kind of
Ugh.
situation.
Is
Yeah,
it
really.
like it's like when Dave Smith says that the people who deny the Holocaust are also the ones who would want one to, if it was happening today, would support it.
Right, right, right. Like, I mean, yeah, exactly. It's like, why deny it? It seems like something you'd kind of be into. Like,
Right.
I don't,
Ugh.
there's kind of stupid things like that, and like libertarian and Christian overlap when it comes to this thing. And I think that it might be a tone difference more than it is a philosophical difference.
Right.
And I
Now I
think
will say,
this is why I've kind of just pointed more to like the fruits are what it is, right? If
sure.
your kid ends up dumb about the Holocaust, that's a negative fruit, right? Like that's it had a negative consequence on her life. If your kid commits suicide because of how you responded to when they came out of the closet, that's a negative fruit, right? That's bad,
Yes.
And so like these are things that I have to passionately speak about, because even though people might be like, well, I don't want the government telling my kids they're gay. Look, I've seen all the libs on TikTok, and like there's some wackos out there that get into public education on the right. Well, mostly on the left, let's be honest, but are there some right wingers that want to keep them at home to indoctrinate them into something else that's really gross? Absolutely, right? We have an epidemic of
Right.
suicides
And
because of
we
this,
don't
right?
want kids like I don't care, like means don't justify the end. You know what I mean? And it's like even if the
Right.
thing you're indoctrinating your children in has parts of it that I agree with, it's like, but first of all, how you do something matters, and also how
Absolutely.
the child accepts and comes to a conclusion matters. Like, I don't want someone to profess Christ as their savior because they were brainwashed into doing it. Like
Right.
that's not legitimate. It doesn't mean
There's
it's
people
why
in
God gave us free
therapy.
will. That's
There's
why
people
God
in
gave us
therapy when they leave Christianity, and I'm like, dude, that sucks. Like
yeah.
that is such a sucky thing because Christianity is so awesome. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like
go ahead, keep continue
the
on.
whole reason why God gave us free will is like because like he didn't want just like mindless drones who just like automatically because they were created that way loved him and like chose like no it's like I want the same way like anyone who is decent wants a spouse who chose to be with them, not someone who just like is like a robot who's I mean some people want that but like I that's not very like psychologically healthy or
Right.
morally praiseworthy.
What
So
does God want? I want your heart. I want your mind. I want your spirit. I want your body. I want you. God
yeah,
doesn't want him in you. He wants you, right? And
right,
so like
right.
that's the
So
beauty of this whole thing.
you want like I want my children to come to Christ. I want my
Of course.
children to even like listen, like if we're talking about like some of the touchy subjects, like whether it's transgenderism or homosexuality
Sure.
or even if it's like being an atheist or being a statist, like I have opinions about what I think is right and wrong
Hmm.
and the kind of choices and beliefs that I want my child to have. But the worst mistake I could make in trying to get my child to come to those conclusions would be to try to coerce them into them. Like that is going to be 100% counterproductive towards me trying to push them in the right direction.
Yep.
So that
Well,
is something that I can 100% agree with you on. It's also to go even further as far as like because then there's like another layer. Like okay, maybe it's not coercion to hold out like I would say like there's different layers here, like you could withhold information or you could only present one side of a particular subject, right?
right.
And you got to be careful with both of those things, and this is where I depart really hard from a lot of the Hoppian crowd, because as much as I more than some of the more I don't know, like Cato or quote unquote more praggy or blue pilled or whatever libertarians, I'm definitely
Me.
there's a lot from Hoppe that I like, but and I'm not even against the idea of a covenant community here, but I've always told people like it wouldn't really be my thing because I think the problem is not so much like, on a property rights level. The problem is more on a like, well, we kind of already have done this. Like maybe we didn't do it through the perfect ANCAPA stand property rights way, but we had a culture where we basically told people if they didn't live certain lifestyles, they'd get ostracized out of society, and it didn't work, right?
Right.
If anything, it had the exact opposite effect. It created more of the thing that you were kind of trying to push back against, because it turns out if people are struggling with those things, repressing it is the worst thing you can do. And the other problem is like if you over like there's over condemning and demonization, which can backfire, but then also there's over protection where there's like that isolationism where like you don't like like kids who grow up and like don't know that there are people who are gay or people who are trans or people who are whatever, or stereotypes like all Muslims are terrorists or all atheists are godless degenerate heathens. And again, I have issues with Islam. I have issues with atheism. I have issues with homosexuality and with transgenderism. But stereotypes are harmful, and overprotect like isolating information from children just means like you're probably like if anything, I think it's going to have the opposite effect, because then when they encounter that stuff in the real world, they're going to realize that they were sold a like a soiled bag of goods, right? Like they weren't told the truth. Yep. And then that makes them actually question and be distrustful towards your perspective, even if it is the right perspective. And so I think you and I would probably agree on that stuff. I think, the only area, like put it this way, when it comes to some of those topics, it like let's just get right, like go to the extreme. Let's say like I had a child who came to me, like one of my kids, who came to me and said that they were struggling with their identity in terms of their gender, and they thought that they were having thoughts that like I feel more like like say it was my son. He said like I feel more like a girl sometimes, and sometimes I feel like I'm a girl who is just in a boy's body.
Yeah.
First thing I'm going to do is tell my son that I love him, and that my relationship with him is not dependent upon any of his choices in terms of what he does in pertaining to this struggle. That my love for him is unconditional, and that even if and that as he grows up, that he's going to have the freedom to do things that I might not agree with, but that my love for him is going to be unchanged by if he does things that I don't agree with. And that's always going to be my foundation. I'm probably going to find a way from my worldview to try to gently lead my child or gently influence them in a direction that I think is better for them in the long term. And I'm going to probably make claims about those subjects from my worldview in terms of what I think is right and wrong, what I think is true and false. But I would not lock them in the house and like control their phone and their internet and be like, you're on lockdown and I got to make sure you're not influenced by the wrong people and that you don't see certain things. It's like, no, like at some point you got to be like the father with the prodigal son. Like you have to, like they can leave, and you just pray that if they do leave, that they find out that course of action wasn't good for them, and they come back. And when they come back, you run to them and you wrap them up and you pick them off the ground and you rejoice. And that would be the extent to which I would respond to that. And now I think there are some people in like the GSM right community who would, I think, push back against what I just said, because they think that me pushing back in any form, even with like me pushing back from like, hey, listen, I love you. You're my child. It's never going to change. These are the things that I think are good for your well-being, short-term and long-term. And having that kind of, gentle push on my child's life, they would criticize to one degree or another. But sure. And when I say the word authority, it's like, I think I have the authority in terms of the stewardship that God has given me to like, listen, like I want to protect the well-being of my child. It's a difficult balancing act because like I don't want to ostracize them from me. I don't want them to feel like if they, I don't want to encourage suicidal thoughts because they feel like they're
course.
not going to be accepted by me. At the same time, I want to encourage things that I think, are not to diminish their struggle. I just that I think what it comes down to is just that my opinions on some of these subjects are just on the facts on the ground might differ from these people, and one of us is right or one of us is wrong, or maybe we're both wrong or both partially right. Who knows? It's complicated,
Right.
but I think the parent has the right to, at the very least, speak into their child's life and to make the case for what they think is the best course of action. But you shouldn't force your child into anything. I mean, the most I would do is like I don't know, like I don't want public school teachers talking to my child about this while he's 8 years old or anything. You know what I mean? Like that might be something that I push back against pretty strongly, which I know that's a big headline in the current libertarian conversation because of some recent LP National tweets. But I don't know what your thoughts on there. But I don't know. I just put a lot out there. I'll let you respond to any or all of it.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, so I think that I default back to the result will tell you if you made the right decision or right. Now, that's not to say that the ends justify the means. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. A lot of people try to get that right result by doing the wrong thing. This is how
Right.
a lot of statism works, right? I know
Yep.
this guy sucks, but if we do this really bad thing, a good thing will happen, right? That never is how it works. It's always getting worse. It's like, and that is the way like that works, right? So I don't believe that. That being said, I do think it's a barometer because none of us are perfect, right? We can look back and say, did I make the right decision or not? So when we, and we don't make this decision for our kids. We need to make that very clear, especially stewards. When it comes to something like gender identity or sexuality, that's as personal as things get, right? Like this is not something that I, as a parent, get to choose for my child. This is not something that even a doctor gets to choose for my child. This is not something that somebody else gets to write on a piece of paper. This is not something a politician gets to choose for my child. This is not something a teacher gets to choose for my child. This is something that my child will choose for themselves. And it is a journey, and there are stages on that journey to them choosing it. And I think that we have right now really great examples of far right parents having their trans kids commit suicide because they're assholes, right? And their kid was trans and they're like, nope, you're not going to be that way, dead, right? And then you have the far left parents that are literally like sewing baby penises to put in their girl's diaper so that if she wants to transition to a male, it'll be a more natural process. Like, I mean, you see on some of these TikToks, these kids are in tears with their parents hounding them about their gender constantly. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, at some
Or
points,
girls like, and again, it's like I want to be clear. I obviously believe that there are people out there who have a genuine, not a because like some people will make the argument that it's all a social contaminant, and I think that there's an element of that. But I also think there are people who are born and like that's just like that's yeah, they have that deep rooted struggle, and there's some like the studies show that with some people when they become adults that they had gender confusion when they were kids or teens, but they
right?
outgrow it. But for some, they never outgrow it, and like man, like I mean, I have high levels of empathy for that. Like, I can't imagine the distress that it causes these people.
So what's the right thing to do?
Well,
Well,
and it's not for me to say really what the right
you
thing to
can't
do is.
know. You need to. So the best what we can do. What's the right thing to do? Have the conversation, right? Prepare ourselves to have the conversation. Prepare ourselves to lay out all the facts. Prepare ourselves to learn, right? Like not many of us are over here that are like masters at genetics, but how many of us would start to study that? If we all of a sudden had a kid that's like, hey, dad, I'm having these feelings, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm
I,
learning today.
I guess I have some intuitions and strong opinions on what I think the wrong things to do about that are. But there's no, I mean, no one has
Killing
the
your
silver.
kid is wrong. Sure.
Well, yeah,
Bullying
yeah.
them to death is wrong.
But
Starving them to death is
I
wrong.
think even like you don't want to demonize trans people, but the problem is I think the left has gone like the polar opposite other direction, where it's like well, everyone is, potentially trans, or, gender is just completely fluid and has no connection to biology or whatever, which then that just further radicalizes the right reactionaries to just like double triple down on their stuff, and none of that's helpful.
Right.
But I think
You got dead kids either way. You got
right.
kids
Well,
that
you
transitioned when they
you have
shouldn't
dead
have,
kids, or you have
and they
kids
killed
who
themselves.
transitioned and regret it, because like like young women who
That's
had
what
their
I just
breasts
said.
chopped off. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
so there's harm being done to kids on both sides,
Right.
and I will definitely grant that. And it it's the problem I have is that like one side seems to have a very strong control over the institutions that most people send our kids to.
Yeah.
And then and also the media, which a lot of the kids are plugged into in terms of on the cultural scene. And so
Right.
I have concerns about that. Doesn't mean but I have concerns about the other side too.
But in every state, you can pull your kids out of school, and
Oh yeah, I
and
think
then
that's
start
always
them
the
again.
right call. It's
Right.
not always, but then it's like, well, so then that comes down to, okay, some people would say that me homeschooling my child, if I'm not teaching the same curriculum about transgenderism in my home
Right.
that like the public school in my district is teaching, then I'm harming my child, or at the very least, I'm teaching a transphobic curriculum.
Right.
And that's where I have some pushback, and it's like I think as a parent I have the right to exercise my authority, but I also would agree with you that like other people then have the right to judge the fruits of my actions in terms of like, well, if I take a course of action and it's like, 5 years down the ride, 5 years down the road, my kid kills himself. It's like, well, obviously I picked the wrong path.
Right. So like, here's the thing. I would say you never have the right to authority. You don't have really the right to stewardship. You have the responsibility. And what you can do is you can fail or succeed at that stewardship.
But what
And
do you,
it's
but what do
important
you,
that you
but
succeed, right?
how would you then explain? Cause like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is I have, when my child is, a minor,
Uh-huh.
I think that the parent has a claim to some sort of exclusivity in terms of a role in their children's life that no other adults can claim. Now, if you want to say that's not the same as having a right to authority, okay, I'm open to a better way to describe it. But to me, it's like it's hard for me to like, if you have an exclusive claim to something, it's hard to not call that a right. I don't know what else we would call that,
But you
other than a
don't
right.
have the right. The child has the right over their own rights. Like, the authority is literally to have the power over somebody's decisions, to be able to enforce obedience to them, right? And like, even if like at first you like kind of help kids along the path, this is hardly making decisions for them, right? This is still setting them up to make their own decisions.
But what I
You're
mean
just
is
giving
like,
them the most information possible.
here's what I mean.
Right.
The state can't tell me to. They can tell me what not to do to my kids, maybe. Like any government can tell you not to murder your kids. You don't even need government for that. Like, just don't kill your kids. But the government has no right to compel me to do something with the children I have stewardship over. You know what I mean? Like, they can't come into my house and say, you have to do things according to X, Y, and Z.
Right.
I mean, they have like the right de facto through fiat, of course, but like what I mean, like they don't have like the moral right. Like I
Right. I
think,
know what you're saying.
yeah. So it's like again, this is kind of a semantics thing. It's just like, there is to me some exclusivity, not in terms of controlling the child, but more so in terms of like I have input into my child's life and, into the raising of my child that no other adult has an equal claim to. The state doesn't have that kind of claim. Even my church doesn't have that kind of claim. My my parents, like their grandparents, don't have that kind of claim. You know what I mean? Like, now, obviously, there's going to be other adults in your kids' lives that are like role models and influence them. But like when it comes down to it, it's like the parents have, I think, the highest claim to that special exclusivity in terms of like, until the kid's an adult and moves out on their own. Again, it's tough. Like describing the relationship of children to parents is one of the whether it's from a Christian or libertarian perspective, is one of the harder things to define. But I just there's something there that I would describe as some sort of exclusive claim when compared to other adults and to the state and government.
Sure, right? Like even in the Bible, right? There's an honor your parents. Why don't I also have to honor my grandparents? Why not honor my uncle, right? He's still there too. Ultimately, there
And
are
to some
two.
extent, you should, but it's like there's a different, like it's like a higher
There's two
form. You know what
human
I
beings
mean?
that you, dude, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's no taking that away. Ultimately, they made a decision that led to your existence, right?
Like, I
So,
mean,
like,
and to go to the extreme, it's like when the child's an infant,
mhm,
like it's not even just a right; it is a obligation on the parents. In my mind, like
yeah.
you better take care of that kid, or you better give them to someone who will.
Right.
You know what I mean?
This
Like
is
they.
and this is where and this is where it's like critically important, and this is kind of what I'm setting up to, is because I don't believe in the state, but that means I need to have a deep cultural change, especially with people that like think they're the boss of their kids, that think they are in charge of, or just, I use the term authority, but whatever we want to say, that they are in charge of their kid and not the kid
Do you
themselves. Like
think
the kid,
authority
they
always
take
means the
that
right
away.
to? Do you think authority always means the right to use force over something? Because I don't define authority that way,
I
and
mean,
that might be
authority
part
is
of
called
the.
a myth. I mean, the reason like we call it a myth in libertarian circles is because the root word author, right? Like, what is your this is you have a right to control all of your works, right? Like if you wrote something, you can burn it, you can sell it, you can fly it up to space if you want to. Like if you create something, you have complete and total ownership of that thing, right? I authored this, I have the authority over this. The myth of authority is when you express that over another human being. I have a kid. I can fly. I can put him into space. I can set him on fire. I can throw him in the freezer if I want. All of a sudden, you kind of go, that doesn't quite sound right, right? Like that's not the type of authority that I agree with. You can't do that with another human being,
Well, what
right?
would you
Only human
say?
beings can do that to themselves. All of a sudden, I set myself on fire. I put myself into space. I throw myself in the fridge. Now all of a sudden, it's okay. And this is kind of a deep, important thing to understand, because I think anarchists frequently make themselves look bad on this issue, because we'll have the state stepping to state kids. This is the whole reason I read this book. Like I said, it's called Educated, by the way. It's a wild book. It's pretty short. It's about um, this poor girl and her parents just miseducated the heck out of them on purpose. And the thing is she's a raging statist now. Like you get to the end and it's like really sad, but you see why, right? Like she wants people to have public education. She wants people to have these things because she was tremendously let down by her anarchist family, right? And so like the thing is this is, what do I either have to say, like as an anarchist, I defend these people's rights, nobody should have intervened in that situation. But that's wrong. These kids were, I mean, one of them actually got brain damage because like what the parents were doing. Like there is harm, both very obvious harm, and we need to also talk about unarmed obvious harm, right? Like we've seen kids before where all their teeth are rotten, and it's like, what are the parents doing? Like how did you allow this to happen? Their kids are sick. Well, I'm feeding my kid the necessary calories. Okay, well there's this sliding scale between I'm feeding them nothing but like gobstoppers and like you're required by law to feed them X amount of all nutrients, right? Like there's this scale where we kind of say below a certain point, that point's never going to be defined, right? This is why I kind of trash the rule of law a lot, because there is no point where I can define it, because there's no point when the government should intervene. But there is a point when culturally, we need to be able to say, you've done wrong by your kids,
Oh, I agree, but I
and
think,
yeah.
but you can have in my mind, like you can have authority and just do wrong with that authority, but that doesn't mean that you didn't have the authority to do that. But and you would ideally want to hold people responsible in some way, and even if it isn't in a criminal or legal sense, like definitely culturally, like yeah, like we should have a strong cultural pushback against people who misuse uh authority, even if it's not like like I think you, you give up a certain authority to a spouse, right? Like my wife has a certain level of authority over me, and I have a certain level of authority over her because of like the kind of relationship we have. But if either one of us is misusing the authority that we've kind of like consented to the other person having, we're going to grow resentful, and it's going to put a strain on our relationship. Whereas if we use that authority responsibly, not to like we're trying to control one another, but rather like we're trying to hold each other accountable, we're trying to be good partners, to me that is like that's what authority should be. I mean, to me it's the same way that God has authority, but God doesn't use his authority to be a tyrant. He uses his authority to be a savior and to be a good father. So I don't know. We're running out of time here, but I don't like. I think it, it's partly semantics and how you define the word, I guess. But I guess it's, to me, there are ways you can have authority that don't require the use of force or coercion over somebody. I hear what you're saying as far as like, where does that line in terms of like harm being done and people stepping in? It's like it's easy to point out the extremes. It's like if someone is letting their children watch too much TV, it's like probably not good for the kid, but like society doesn't have the right to come in and like take the kid away from the parents for doing that. On the flip side, it's like if there was evidence of like, God forbid, like, the worst, like, parents raping their children, like, yeah, like, don't wait for the police, like go go take the kids away from that parent, like, right now. And but then it's like, okay, what action hits the threshold that like before like something a degree lower you don't take action, and then the next step up now you do it's a line drawing problem. Like where's the line between people being shitty parents, but you gotta let them do it, versus we gotta step in, whether it's the village takes care of it or some kind of government apparatus. Because again, I don't have a problem with the state even coming in and I mean, listen, the foster care is horrible, but like, I mean, I don't care about police and child protective services coming to take kids from some parents who are just actively like torturing and destroying their children. You know what I mean? So it's very situational.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I think we come full circle in this conversation. Is the point isn't never to sin and never to make a mistake, because there's degrees of mistakes, right? I mean, all sin is translated from one word, hamartia, which means it's the same word for misunderstanding, right? So if we all have this misunderstanding, that it's like, well, there's different degrees of misunderstandings, right? Certainly, and is there is it weird to be like, you sinned by not feeding your kids all of their nutrients? It's like, well, that's a weird way to put it, but I guess like it wasn't.
Or it depends on why. Like maybe you were ignorant of the.
That's exactly it. But that's why that's what sin literally means, right? Yeah. I didn't understand. I didn't know.
But then what if the reason you did is because there's a Department of Nutritional Health that the government created, and they're giving you a bunch of bad misinformation because the government sucks at everything. It's like there's so many different layers and variables here. So it's like
the best we can do is deal with it on a cultural level. And this is why I am so stressful of this cultural level, and why I'm so sensitive to libertarians who have a really negative, nasty. I mean, Dave Smith was talking about the other day, you linked me this video, and I think had a good point to say, like, you have the most humanitarian, like positive, loving, compassionate message, and if you convey it like an asshole, you failed the message, right? Like you failed like what's the plot of, you can memorize every verse of the Bible and not get the Bible, right? Can't you? But if you just say, let's say I haven't memorized any verses, I don't know a single Bible verse, but you know what, I believe in Christ and I've given him my life, and I hope to walk by his, like, do what is right and love my neighbor as myself, and I love God, right? Okay, obviously that second person is in a much better place, than somebody who just goes around memorizing all the Bible verses like a robot. Your computer has all the Bible verses memorized. I don't know if it's going to heaven, versus you as a person who can say, like, look, I am flawed. I don't know everything. I'm not sure of things. I am scared. I am a sinner. I am weak, but I am hoping that the power of Christ can help me understand these things, help give me that forgiveness that I need. And we have these amazing things, these amazing tools at our disposal. And the tone so matters. If you convey the most loving philosophy on earth, like you are a hateful person, you have seriously effed up your message. Right. And it creates a cultural problem, because then you get people to say, hey, That hateful attitude is pretty cool, right? I quoted this verb from Proverbs the other day. Proverbs 17, like the whole thing talks about like not fighting with people, right? Like relentlessly and creating fights when there doesn't need to be a fight, and sometimes we think we're fighting about really important stuff, but ultimately at the end of the day, did it change anything? Or did you just fight about stupid stuff? And most of the time you just find that nobody actually changed. The verse that I quoted talks about how it raises the gate, like makes it impossible to get in when you're having a fight with somebody. And this happens very often with people that are right? Like I'm a Christian and a libertarian and an anarchist. I'm right about all that stuff. I have no doubt I am right. And whoever I'm debating is wrong, right? I know this for a fact, right? But if I hold myself like this, if I talk about it like that, how effective am I going to be? If I start being a jerk to everybody that I run into, how effective is my message going to be? Now, people don't like bland. Christ calls us the salt of the earth, right? Salt takes the flavor of something and makes it a million times cooler, right? People who are the salt of the earth aren't bland. There should be no such thing as a bland Christian. You should be the most maximized version of whatever good gifts that God has given you. You should be, that's what it means to be the salt of the earth, this city on a hill, this candle, right? Like this light in the dark. What does a light look like in the dark? Man, it's all you can see, right? So Christians should be so radical that when you're in the room, people are just like, dude, whatever that guy's doing, that's different. That is something else, man. That is unreal. Versus if you're being like an edgelord online or posting like xenophobic stuff or stuff that may be construed that way, but maybe it technically isn't if you look at it in a certain way. Is that what you want to be? Like, that's not what you're called to be as a Christian. It's certainly not positive, like, and like I said, like you should have some zest. I'm not afraid of the spice. What I don't like is hate. What I don't like is that rage and that wrath. And we are, especially as Christians, under a duty to get our message across no matter what it takes. Now, you'll note with Christ, he's according to the Bible, when he spoke to the people, he spoke in nothing but parables. He didn't deal with philosophy or scripture at all. He only told stories on top of feeding them and taking care of them and healing them, right? Helping with their debts sometimes, right? We help people with these things and all of a sudden we open them up. I've talked about this before, that people are more likely to be a libertarian after getting out of debt than they are after reading Man, Economy, and State. Now, maybe it shouldn't be that way. I love philosophy, right? Like it's a huge part of me being a libertarian. But most people, when we communicate, are saying, how do you meet my needs right now, guys? Like, how do you get to me? How does this matter to me? How does this heal me? And so Christ is like, let me focus on healing your stuff and paying your debts and like getting you situated, right? Ultimately, Christ didn't say, Zacchaeus, you need to stop collecting taxes. Zacchaeus came to that conclusion on his own. Christ never said, Mary Magdalene, you need to stop being a prostitute. She came to that conclusion on her own. And what was it? It was after Christ gave them security and built them up and gave them all these wonderful things. And so for me, this culture of love, this culture of goodness and peace, and we have this incredible message as Christians and libertarians. And one of the things that Satan loves to do is contort the best thing there is. Christ doesn't care about, or, Satan's not going to care about lies. Those are already in progress. Those are good, right? Like all the falsehoods, right? What Satan wants to do is make Christianity look terrible. And he will use imposters to do it. Satan wants to make, I have no doubt, Satan wants to make libertarianism look terrible and wants to make freedom look awful. And he's going to take people and make it look bad and use their words in the worst possible way. We need to be aware that Satan is doing this and say that, okay, I'm not going to play into Satan's hands and allow him to make this look hateful or bad, right? I'm going to stand up. We talked before, Jacob, and I know you and I have a bit of a disagreement on this subject, which I'm, of course, going to bring in now that we're in the concluding moments here. But with Christ in the temple square, when does Christ get most angry and vitriolic? It's when he's talking to his own leadership, right? It's when he's dealing with Pharisees, like really bad people.
Yeah.
Right. But these are leaders that know better. They're leaders in his own movement. Well, why isn't he going to the Romans? Because they're the Romans. He's a Jew, right? This is the difference here, is that he's like, I don't control them. I can impact the culture around me, and so I am going to impact this culture. Statism's terrible, but we've reiterated how awful statism is and gotten nowhere with it for a very long time. Where this focus needs to shift is now onto culture, and to say, okay, I need to focus, instead of focusing on Satan. Christ is not the anti-Satan. Satan is the anti-Christ. The reason being is because we are not defined by Satan in any way. We want to go out and do good. We have actual objectives. We want to heal. We want to bring goodness and peace and healing to this world. Satan and the state get in the way, right? We only hate them by virtue of them getting in our way. I don't care. If they're out of my way, I don't care, right? Otherwise. And I think that to me is like a really important thing when we talk about this, because I think that's like the core of kind of when we have these disagreements online. We haven't had it so much today, but when we have these disagreements online, it's a lot of, I understand I'm talking about tone and a lot, and reading into things. And people can say, well, this is technically true. This is technically right. This is technically this. Well, he didn't technically say this. That doesn't matter. Christ spoke in parables because he wanted to avoid technicalities so bad.
Yeah.
As soon as you've gotten into technicalities, you've lost your message.
Regarding the subject you brought up, I mean, when Hodey Johns and Michael Malice and Dave Smith all say that something missed the mark.
Yeah.
I take a step back and go, okay, maybe I'm, and I kind of realized my issue, which goes into what you were saying, and honestly, it's basically just, I could just paste 1 Corinthians 13 up here and it would say it better than me. I mean, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And all the gifts of prophetic powers and anything that you can do, but it's not in love, it's all for naught. So we have to be defined by what we love, not by what we hate. You know what I mean? Like it's, what, and not that, like, we should point out the horrific effects of the things we hate. Like we should point out the horrors of war. We should point out the horrors of the IRS or the COVID regime or the war on drugs or our criminal justice system. Point all that out.
Yep.
But if all we do is focus on loudly just railing against what we hate with more hatred, that's not what I'm about. That's not what Christ is about. That's not what libertarianism should be about. And I definitely got caught up in just my hatred of evil when that whole New Hampshire tweet got sent out, because it was just like, but like, it was just like something about like, oh, how could you make fun of someone who's mourning over their parent? I was just like, God, how many children have mourned over their parents because of this man? Right. But you know what? That hypocrisy noted, we got to be better than our enemies. And if we just meet fire with fire, what does Jesus say on the Sermon on the Mount? And then what does Paul echo in Romans 12? It's like, don't overcome evil with evil. You have to overcome evil with good. It's like that Martin Luther King quote, darkness can't drive out darkness. Only light can do it. And man, it's tough. But, I definitely had to, swallow the bitter pill and kind of admit defeat on that one, and realize that I was not acting out of a spirit of love, but rather out of a spirit of hate. And listen, I mean, I'll at least, to defend myself, like, if you're going to hate something, hating neocons who have slaughtered millions of people or advocated for the slaughter of millions of people is, there are some things that you could hate that are, like, if you're going to hate something, hate that, I guess. But that shouldn't be our focus. So I think we can, end on a point of agreement there.
Yep. Pro love and pro liberty comes before anti-state. I think when you learn in terms of being anti-state, you start to stand for nothing. And I think that's actually something the state wants for us.
My wife's chiming in with some nice one-liners too. Yeah. I mean, that's what is when you do kindness to your enemy, it's like what was the verse, like you're dumping hot coals on their head.
Oh yeah, hot coals on their head.
You know what I mean? So it's like and it shows people you're better than them. So
and as Christians and libertarians, we are better than them. We we should always carry ourselves as such. But yeah, it's I mean, I say it I'm joking, but you mentioned this, like, it is a different standard for them and for us. I have no standard for Satan, right? I have no standard for the state. That anybody who, and think of all the people who are statists, right? Like 99% of the planet, right? I have no standard for them. I don't measure them. What I can do is measure myself, and focus on doing a good pro-love thing. Now, if the state gets in your way, like I said, I'm not going to stop calling out the state for getting in the way of love, right? But there becomes a point where you're clearly more anti-state than you are pro-love and pro-liberty. And
Yeah,
you
yeah.
kind of see that with people that like are all of a sudden like, you'll see it because
It's
they'll make a mistake with their
and it's
philosophy,
hard,
right?
man. Like, I
They'll
mean, when
be
you're
like pro taxation because it's a company they don't like,
yeah,
right? And I'm just like, hey, you've lost the plot, right? Like you've
yeah,
spent so long in hate that you've lost your principles. You've lost like your core because you didn't have that love at your core. You had what I hate at my core. And so and all of a sudden you see the fire on fire and you're just like, oh, that I'm okay with. That is fine, right?
yeah. I mean, and it's really easy to get caught up in they get caught up in hating those things. Like it's super easy because like, when you see the true depravity of, like some days, man, like I don't know where what your walk is. Like there are some days I wake up and just like the full weight of how awful things are in the world sometimes hits me, and I'm just like, man, I can't believe God said He'd never flood the earth again. Like, why'd you take that off the table, man? Like,
Well, and I think, I mean, Jacob,
but I mean, it's
you talked about like the pro messaging, like the better messaging, which is like, here are victims of war crimes, right? Like each one of these is a person with a story. It's a human being. It's somebody's sibling, child, like mother or father. And you could go on about these stories. And it's like, that's a very creative way to be anti-state, because what it is it's not saying I hate the state, I'm anti-war. You're not actually anti-war. You're pro those people, and war is in the way, right? I was never like, Satan is gonna go off and do his own thing. I have no control over Satan, right? He's off doing his
yeah,
own thing. He's crazy. He's making bets with God and giving people leprosy, and like he's a weirdo, right? Satan is unhinged, a lunatic, right? I can't control him. But what I can do is say, I don't think about Satan, right? Like, get away, get thou behind me, Satan, get away from me, right? Like, just get out of here. I don't, my business is not with you. I'm not even here to kill you or to shake hands with you. You just need to move, right? And this is kind of this is the Christic mindset, right? What Christ did. What I am pro those people who died, right? Am I anti-cop or am I pro Duncan Lemp? Right? Am I really saying this life was such a special thing and it was robbed because of this?
well,
And
and that
it seems like a small thing, right? Like it seems like a really small thing because you're going to come off as like anti-cop when you be pro Duncan Lemp. But the thing is your message is going to land when
but
you
you know
say,
what?
I love these people.
Jesus was anti taxes, but he wasn't anti-tax collector to the point where he just demonized them all. I mean, a tax collector became one of his apostles. So it's
Yeah.
like, and I guess to the extent, like it can be really hard to, and this is the more Christian side of things, but like even someone like John McCain, God loved him and wanted to redeem him. Like didn't love the things he did, but like that's still one of God's children that he desperately wanted to redeem and put on a better path. And it's like the enemy, these people are guilty of dehumanizing so many people,
Yeah.
and man, it's so easy to want to do it back to them, but that's just not the path that leads to success. So we have to be better. And I was not better at that moment, and so I definitely have to own up to that. So
Obviously,
um
when I dismissed everybody in the LPMC as a cult, I wasn't either. But we all miss the mark sometimes, right? All have sinned to fall short.
yeah. Hey, it's Brett Favre threw a lot of interceptions. You know what I mean? So
It's gonna happen,
I
right? I
guess at
win
the
a lot,
beginning.
guys. I have some losses, but I have some wins.
Yeah, cool. Well, hey, we're at the 2-hour mark, which is 30 minutes more than I told my wife we'd do, but she's being gracious
I
about it.
like
But
how
I'm
she
not
hopped in the
gonna.
chat. She's
Yeah.
like, Jacob.
Yeah.
Thanks
No,
for
it's all
sharing,
good.
Brianna. I appreciate it, by the way.
Yeah,
I
no,
appreciate it.
I mean, gosh, I mean, if you're a man out there, you don't have yourself a good spouse, I mean, geez, I mean,
Marry
I
Brianna.
don't. Yeah, I took the high road. Bria's emanating in the wisdom of turning the other cheek and
yeah, I appreciate you sharing them, and I always enjoy my conversations with you, Jacob. Like I said, when people were talking smack or whatever, it's like this doesn't get better with more division. Division's how we got here. Like I understand not talking to somebody, but that comes at a point where you're talking. Like, I mean, I would probably even talk with Hitler. There comes a point where it's like, when is somebody beyond saving? You know what I mean? And we kind of have to say, I don't think anybody's ever beyond saving. I think the question is, am I going to save this person?
True.
And I think that's the point where you like
Saul,
block somebody,
people
right?
probably thought that Saul was the last person who would have ever been saved. I mean, it took a road to Damascus experience to save him, but like, if anyone can be saved, I think, and I mean, and to some extent, we have to remember that like all fall short. So it's like we can, we got to be careful not to fall into a spirit of pride where we think we're better than. I mean, it's kind of tough. Like, obviously, like in some ways, like in a very measurable sense, like, yeah, like you're better than a lot of these statists, but like we're better because of, like you said, like because we know better. And if these other people don't know better, it's our job to wake them up, not to, condemn them. It's like because that doesn't lead to any improvement. So, hey, man, I love this conversation. I appreciate you for coming on, for always having my back. I always try to have your back too. And always I appreciate the iron sharpening iron, aspect of our relationship. I hope that you always help me to think things through clearly from different angles and to improve my positions. I hope I can provide the same for you, and that we're all the better for it. And hopefully we can lead by example with people. I think that's all I can hope for. But
best.
Yep. Before we get off, if you want to plug your podcast and just if people want to follow you and anything else you want to mention before we sign off.
Yeah, follow the We Are Libertarians Network. I do have a podcast there, Enemy of My Enemy. It's in a kind of a tough place because unfortunately I love to host right, left, and center libertarian debates on it.
And all we have are righties right now.
We have the righties, and it's not.
If you are a good left libertarian, please reach out to Hodey.
Right.
You can debate me.
The thing is Lou will, right now and I'll admit, like, part of it's myself. I've been making like a cultural transfer. I've been talking more about like the Bible. Actually, I've been talking a lot more about my faith rather than politics, because I think a huge key in this is I think that I can't, that whole bit about not being able to control anybody else, I can at least have some influence over Christians, not over them, but I can influence Christians.
Ooh, you're trying to be an authoritarian.
I know, that's me, right? And I'm going to strongly discourage them from doing anything I don't want to do. No, I just, I think
I already got the clip that will be used to show that I won the debate.
Perfect. So, I lose. All right. Good night, everybody. No, but like, I think that I can have some, I can help in that regard. And it's a journey for me too. A lot of what I share is a lot of the stuff that I'm kind of finding out like last week, even like it's just stuff that I am going through now. And in sharing it, I'm finding that other Christians are kind of finding the same thing. And I feel that Christianity can get to a better place, and politics is always downstream from culture, right? So if Christianity is a good place and Christian culture is in a good place, that's when all of a sudden politics starts getting in a good place. I just haven't had much success. I've tried a GOP strategist. I've done that for a bit. I worked in the LP for a bit. I am just flatly better at this cultural thing than I am at the political game. And I just feel that we are going to make a better cultural difference if I kind of influence stuff by even just like video games, Christianity, barbecue, the stuff that I love to talk about. That if I can fix those communities that actually matter to me, that are actually close to me, that I'll make more of a difference than telling somebody to vote for the gold
We need to do a sports and video game podcast from a Christian libertarian perspective.
So Christianity, libertarianism,
we'll have an audience of 5 people.
Right, yeah. Right. Like it's hard not to want to do a variety show when you got all these interests. D&D, throw that in there too. Yeah. Well, what can I do? All right.
All right. Cool, man. But hey, I appreciate you coming on. Definitely, guys, check out Hodey and everything he's doing. Even while the podcast is on hiatus, there's a lot of episodes you go back and watch on lots of great subjects, and they're always a blast to hear people kind of like we did here. People from different perspectives exchange ideas, and it's all for the betterment of our minds and our souls. So I appreciate you coming on, Hodey. I appreciate everybody who came in and watched. Appreciate my wife for putting up with me and my incessant talking. But yeah, thanks everybody again. And until next time, remember, don't fear the fire.